Hello and welcome to Reroll. My name is Angus Morrison and today I will be taking a look at what has become a staple of the modern game, DLC. 5 minutes research will tell you that game development rarely ends at release, instead giving rise to a wealth of extra content patched in, sold separately or otherwise appended to the initial product. And this is contentious. People really do get very passionate on the issue, especially where extra content demands extra money. So in the next few minutes we'll look at some recent examples, shady business practices, and my own opinions on gaming's little additions. I've selected footage from a range of games which have all had content added in their own way, some of which I haven't reviewed but are nonetheless relevant to the matter at hand, such as the wonderful Blood Dragon. And hey, it's nice to have some variation. It'd be good to begin with some definitions to specify the parameters of my argument with regard to extra content, but honest to God, trying to classify extra content at the moment is like sorting water into piles. They all run together and create a mess. There once was a time, not that long ago, when a game broad enough in scope to warrant extra content did it in the form of an expansion pack. Games like Morrowind or World of Warcraft, as is still the case, would put together an almost self-contained batch of new content released months after the initial game to breathe new life into it. They were released on disc, packaged and shipped to stores. They were of a scale to make them essentially games in their own right. But the concept of the expansion pack, with all its promises of gameplay enough to warrant a pack, is becoming increasingly muddled under the colossal umbrella term that is DLC. Downloadable content. That may well be the least descriptive phrase in the English language. It tells you absolutely nothing about what to expect other than its content will be downloadable. It's like a menu displaying edible foodstuffs. And there's a third challenger for the title of extra content, which I lack a single word to describe, and that concerns the likes of Far Cry 3 Blood Dragon, though I'm not sure there are the likes of Blood Dragon. It's different, to say the least. Blood Dragon utilises all of the basic systems of Far Cry 3. It's not just something developed in the same engine, it takes major components such as controls, AI, many of the assets, and directly reuses them. Far Cry 3 but with a glorious neon paint job. But what a change it makes! Apart from its shared genetics, the story, the tone, setting and palette are entirely different from the game whose name it boasts. This isn't the Rook Islands tropical paradise, but a distant future 2007 cyber adventure. Blood Dragon doesn't even require that Far Cry 3 be installed to play it. I'm sure there must be examples of this being done before, using an existing game for a completely new purpose and releasing it as a standalone, but no examples spring to mind immediately. I mean, maybe Dead Island Riptide, but that wasn't so much repurposed as re-released, and honestly I'm trying to erase it from my memory. So, in the absence of clear precedent for this, it's hard to know whether to call it an expansion, a game, DLC. But as we already know, DLC can refer to anything from a single weapon through to a 5-hour campaign, a la Knife of Dunwall, or longer for something like Skyrim's Dragonborn. And my point here is that any argument for or against, or generally about DLC, has to be very specific in what it's arguing. And if you're inclined, as many are, especially when discussing a certain electronic arts, to throw out blanket statements like DLC should and must be boycotted, congrats, you've made approximately 0 sense. To boycott DLC as a collective entity is to insist that a game remain fixed in its state of release, which, while I won't go so far as to say it defeats the point of a game, it certainly marginalises one of the key features which differentiate games from other media. For books, films, TV, music, once they're released, that's it. You can release a new edition or a director's cut, but a passive medium does not foster the same ongoing two-way relationship with a product in the same way as games do. DLC, which, as an umbrella term, technically includes patching as well, puts developers in a position to create deeper, more dynamic or more varied products outside of the time constraints for an initial release and without the colossal investment which goes into a new game. It's similar to my argument regarding reboots. If you have all of those systems and assets in place, why not do a little more with them before discarding them forever? Well, I know what the fears are, and in some respects the growing tidal wave of DLC worries me too. It's money and power, and while I sound a little like I'm quoting from a B-movie, those words do nicely summarise the arguments against DLC. We'll start with power. It's connected with the increasing inclusion of microtransactions in games, the exchange of small and, well, sometimes not so small, sums of real money for a new skin, power-up or weapon, really any item that you can't obtain or can only obtain very slowly via gameplay. Now, I have no problem with purely cosmetic items like those of Katy Perry's Sweet Treats for The Sims 3, which I am of course a great fan of. But worries arise when the fruits of spending impinge on gameplay, especially in multiplayer. If the Guardians of the Ultimate Apocalypse weapon of planet Kablar 5 only accept credit card, then the rich immediately have an advantage over the rest of the player base. There's also the possibility that microtransactions will directly affect the tone of a game, as I believe happened in Dead Space 3. The knowledge that my debit card would see me safely through a rough spot kind of undermined the feeling of seat-of-your-pants pursuit through a derelict spaceship. Even if you never intend to use the feature, the very presence of microtransactions in a horror game means that you're no longer forced to rely on your own wits to see you safely through. And this ties straight into the money. How much of DLC, from microtransactions through to expansions, is quality new content for the player, and how much is soulless cash grab? When the presence of DLC is planned in advance, how much is left out of the original game in order to drip feed us later? There are examples of some truly atrocious, blatantly exploitative creations. Final Fantasy All the Bravest, for example, was less of a game and more of a highly advanced iPhone holding simulator, devoid of fun and impossible to work without mass financial input. Companies such as EA, however, have not necessarily earned all of the ire directed towards them. A particular focus for public wrath has been their treatment of Battlefield 3, reliably releasing new map and game mode packs every few months since its release in 2011. But for me, this is precisely what DLC is best suited to, providing extra, optional content for an already complete game. Maps and game types are the staples of the online FPS. Each match is differentiated from the last by the new setting and new objectives. Story is not their concern, and so a new map pack offers players something they couldn't have otherwise experienced in the original game. At the same time, the original game is very well furnished. It has all the features and a similar number of maps to its immediate predecessor, Bad Company 2, which released only the one expansion. Its default unlocks are plentiful, and the first weapons available are some of the best in the game. You do not need the DLC to play the game as it was intended, and it provides an enjoyable bonus for those who purchase it. There was controversy over a truly bungled pricing strategy on the introduction of Battlefield 3 Premium, which offered all the expansions and ongoing perks for a lower price than many people had already paid or would end up paying. But for now, he says tentatively, I will declare this exclusively a product of teething problems at EA and not a reflection on the content itself. But this contrast illustrates once again that you cannot argue about DLC in black and white terms. DLC in itself cannot be good or bad. Certain types of DLC or specific business practices surrounding DLC are ripe for criticism, but generalized moaning about DLC will get us nowhere, especially as some of it is excellent. DLC in all its forms reflects the integral ability of games to be modified and extended after their release. This is a powerful feature by which we may continue to experience our favourite worlds in new capacities without waiting years between games. It is something that will, and really it already has, become a staple part of many games. But just because we accept DLC as a standard accompaniment to the modern game does not mean that we as gamers choose to approve of every piss-poor offering that a publisher spews out. Like the games of which they are a part, a piece of DLC may be good or it may be bad, and it will be judged by the market accordingly. Reroll will be keeping an eye on DLC and additional content as it comes out, and if it's not up to scratch, I'll tear it to bits. Subscribe, it's going to be fun. So long as we as gamers aren't content to throw money at every half-baked patch that comes our way, I can't see any reason to dislike